So the next story is earlier this week, uh, the Trump administration, and in particular the U.S. ambassador to the United Nations, announced that the U.S. was withdrawing and no longer going to serve on the United Nations Human Rights Commission. So I'm actually surprisingly torn on this one. So there's the Commission for Human Rights at the UN. There are many commissions at the United Nations where they legislate and talk about these different issues. So this is the human rights one. So the U.S. has pulled out, and for the reason they didn't specifically say, but in reality, everyone knows because they believe that it has an anti-Israel bias. It's too harsh on Israel. So I'm a little torn on this, and the reason being, well, of course, I don't necessarily like what they're doing, and I certainly don't agree with the reasoning. In a way, I don't think we should be on the Human Rights Council. I mean, as one of the leading purveyors of human rights abuses in our own country and around the world, we shouldn't, And that's not to say we're the only ones. I mean, there are many countries that shouldn't. Russia shouldn't, Iran shouldn't, Saudi Arabia shouldn't, Israel shouldn't, China shouldn't, North Korea sure as hell shouldn't. A lot of countries shouldn't, so don't get me wrong. In fact, part of me wonders if you were to look at it country by country, it might be more shouldn't than should. But their reasoning smacks of gross and disgusting hypocrisy, in that they whine about human rights of other countries, and as they should, honestly. I mean, all these countries I mentioned have very severe human rights violation. Whether or not they're our allies, they are absolutely wrong to commit those human rights. But it's a little bit funny because this is what set them off. Because the UN General Assembly, which has no power, passed a resolution going against Israel in terms of the recent protests there, where there was peaceful protests by the Palestinians, and Israel says, "Oh, Hamas was involved in this or that." The probably not. Okay, just because Hamas runs Gaza, this seems to be more of an organic, popular uprising. But whether you agree with that or not, they shot in, and no Israelis died, and thousands of Palestinians were shot, hundreds were killed. Don't hold me on that number. I have to double check. But many were killed. At least dozens were killed, including journalists, clearly marked with press on their vests, doctors who were there to treat people were targeted and shot and killed. You can't shoot press journalists, and you can't shoot doctors. This is the type of human rights shit that we should be complaining about. So, because the UN criticized that, we pulled out. That's ridiculous. I mean, when you think this is clear human rights abuse, so they should talk about it. And even you think this would get them mad, but not that long ago when Saudi Arabia was put on the council, they did not have a word. They supported it, not a peep. And this actually predated Trump, to be fair, I believe. But still, not a peep when this draconian, authoritarian, fundamentalist regime had a spot on human rights that only just allowed women to drive. It's a putrid, disgusting regime, and we didn't say a word because they're our ally. So, unfortunately, it's got nothing to do with human rights. We have differing standards for human rights. If you're our friend, you can kill as many people as you want. If you're not, forget about it. And frankly, within our own borders right now, look what's happening in the southern border. Look what's happening with police brutality I just talked about. Our human rights record, while better than others, is still not very good. Now, when you talk to political freedom and First Amendment free speech, of course, that's better. But you have to look at other aspects. We're not doing so great. And again, this is not meant to minimize other countries' wrongdoings, but we should be more consistent. And maybe us not being on there is probably for the best. They should be consistent, and we should be talking about all these things.